Well, hello everyone again. If you don't know me by now, my name is Seema Alexander, and I'm coming to you live one more time from the WeWork in downtown Washington, D.C. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the founder and chief strategy officer for Disruptive.ceo, a strategic advisory firm for visionary founders and companies to scale and grow. And I've had the honor and privilege to curate the growth track for the DC startup community this year. Within the growth track, we have 16 panels and workshops, which are fully dedicated to growth-focused entrepreneurs and founders. For those of you who are new to the DC Startup Week community, this has gone on for about 5 years. It's a 5-day completely free resource. It's a conference every September focused on providing regional entrepreneurs with content-rich agendas and networking opportunities to help you grow and scale your business. Before I introduce our workshop today, I want to give a shout out to our title sponsors. We really could not have done this without you. It's Next, Insperity, Wiz, and Technology Rivers. So in this session, we are so excited to have Tom Snyder. Tom is the founder and managing partner of Funnel Clarity, and he's going to be speaking to a workshop that should be near and dear to most of your heart, especially if you're early stage or even growth stage, because filling the startup sales funnel is important no matter what stage you're at. And it's a constant battle, but it's a constant opportunity. So as a way of description, in today's environment, prospects are constantly bombarded with messages. What that next great product, you could have a disruptive product, but how do you actually get in front of a cold lead? So Tom is going to lead us through a process that he has taught and systemized around developing messaging that quickly creates curiosity and really resonates to that end target audience. How do you get in front of executives and target them strategically? Deliver effective messaging that people will actually respond to. And the core one is standing out and differentiating yourself from competitors as a whole, right? So I think that is a very good outcome of what you guys are going to learn within the next 60 minutes. So just a quick FYI, Tom is also moderating our sales growth strategy panel tomorrow at 10 o'clock. And we have the heads of sales for EverFi and General Assembly and the former head of sales for Corporate Executive Board. And he's done an amazing job with other startups over time. So you don't want to miss that one as well. Lastly, from a logistics standpoint, if you do have questions throughout this workshop, please type them in the chat below and just put in capitals question. So as he starts to look for questions, maybe closer to the end, they pop out easy. So we have a full house. I think we have over 70 participants, Tom. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Seema. Appreciate that very much. Welcome, everyone. We're going to be talking about this idea of filling the funnel. And I don't know that as an entrepreneur myself, there is a more daunting task than filling a funnel with qualified opportunities. We only have an hour, so I'm going to try to hit a few highlights. Obviously, this is a topic near and dear to our heart. So we're going to talk about a couple of things you can begin doing immediately, and hopefully you can put these things in practice from the very first moment. Let me share my screen here. Get this going. Boom, boom, share. Okay, hopefully you can see the title slide. The name of our company is Funnel Clarity. We are a training and consulting firm that helps growing companies do just that, fill the funnel. I'll be talking today about some things that are under copyright. I have to put this in here. Lawyers force me to do it. I don't expect anybody to read it, but it basically says this is copyrighted material. So when you go to when you start a company and you have that great idea, that great product, that great service, and you turn around and you think, okay, now it's time to find customers. There is this moment of, holy cow, now what do we do? The idea that the world will be a path to your door is unfortunately a little bit optimistic. You will see the common complaints that people register when they talk about prospecting. One, it can feel very unprofessional. This is an important point because it can feel daunting enough. I always make the joke that everybody that is going to prospect If they're going to be doing that by phone, they want to sit by themselves because they get that very odd tone of voice one only hears when we're calling people we don't know. All of the things I'm going to talk about today, however, apply to both email, phone, social media messages, etc. One thing I want to emphasize, the data are remarkable on this. The phone by itself is more effective than all the other media combined. Effective prospecting, particularly for a company in an emerging growth phase, is to set aside time, have people doing this every day and doing it correctly. There is a path to feeling like a professional. I'll give you a peek in that window today. A lot of times people lament the fact it's hard to find the right people, the decision makers who are deciding about the things you care about most. Not an easy task to find them. And if I find them, I can't reach them. They have this phalanx of things to prevent me from getting through to them. That could be whether that's by email, whether that's by phone, whether that's by social message, whatever. If I do happen to get a hold of them, it's very difficult to get them to engage in a conversation. I don't know of any executive in any firm that sits around thinking, gee, I wish somebody I don't know would call me up and treat me like a prospect. Therefore, we end up feeling awkward. A lot of people find rejection very difficult, so they don't even use the phone. They do entirely everything by email. And in the final analysis, it doesn't really seem to pay off. Well, we're going to talk about a couple of things that can change that, but I've got some good news and bad news about this world we're working in this year that seems to never end. The good news is that if people will follow the path we have discovered through looking at hundreds of thousands of prospecting opportunities, they have a pretty extraordinary performance, even if you consider the fact that we're in a very unusual time. The bad news is that there has been an enormous increase in both the volume of email and the volume of voicemail that people are experiencing. There's also an enormous increase in the use of time on remote media. So people have far, far less time than they used to, meaning that the prospector is faced with a fair amount of headwind. So the trick, of course, is how do we measure? How do we get through that? How do we find these people and actually get them involved? Two major pieces of it. There are some things we need to do before we try to execute. The preparation phase means finding the right people and making that an easy exercise, navigating around any form of gatekeeper, whether that's the automated phone tree, whether that's voicemail, whether that's an assistant, whatever. And then maybe the biggest challenge is, how do I rise above this noise? Because a lot of people are getting calls now, a lot of people are getting emails, and the idea is I need to be prepared to generate curiosity and credibility in a very short amount of time. In an email, that means having the kind of email subject line that people will automatically open that email. Having the first two sentences of the email establish credibility so that there is interest and curiosity. If we find ourselves trying to explain everything we're doing and we're finding ourselves trying to talk about our product and service as something you can't live without, we're automatically going to lose. On the execution side, that's about how do I open my conversation? How do I open a social media exchange, an email exchange, a phone call? How do I open it? And when I open it, generate curiosity within the first few moments of contact. I'm going to show you how to do that. It's non-intuitive. It always works. I need to establish credibility, and I need to set an appointment. If we're treating a prospecting call as a sales call, we are automatically going to lose. The idea is we need to create enough curiosity and credibility that the person is interested in scheduling an appointment to begin a sales cycle. There is no mistake that young companies make that's more dramatic than this. If our outreach is all about us, if our outreach is all about the people we sell to, the things we provide, the benefits we can generate, we're automatically putting people in a very defensive posture. We want to simply create enough curiosity to generate an appointment. And once we have that calendared, ask a few additional questions. So we're going to have time today to cover the things in red. I'm going to talk a little bit about finding the right people. I'm going to talk a little bit about generating curiosity, and then time allowing, we'll talk about how to open that call. So how do we know this? We collected now more than 300,000 calls from more than 110 organizations. I should say outreach, not calls necessarily, but out of 22 industries. We look at that data stream. What are the things that allowed people to be far more successful than the typical intuitive way that people go about this? So this didn't come from the self-anointed brilliance of myself or my colleagues. This comes from looking at very large data samples and teasing out of those data what actually works. So let's talk about finding the right contact. Most companies who are looking for people to sell to do that by looking at job title. There's nothing wrong with that. That makes sense. It's logical. The problem is this: today's job titles have exploded, and the job title itself may or may not be a very accurate predictor of, is this person the kind of person with the responsibilities to make decisions that we care about, buying decisions we care about. So one way of doing this is to not search by job title, but search by keywords. What do I mean by keywords? In LinkedIn profiles, people list what they do. And one of the exercises that every young company should go through is be thinking about, what are the key words and phrases in the LinkedIn profiles of people we want to reach out to that would be a great indicator that they actually make the decisions that we care about. And our best friend in doing that is the Boolean search. I hope everyone's familiar with that. Particularly if you have Navigator, this is a really important way of stringing together keywords. So I don't put out a search and get 10 million hits. I want to get the people that are most likely to make the decisions we care about. The easiest and most common ways of doing Boolean searches are with these connectors. The words and in all caps, the word or in all caps, the word not in all caps, and putting things in quotes. So if you think about it, and you think about the buying community you're appealing to, think about the keywords that would occur in their LinkedIn profile and experiment with stringing them together. You may say something, you may use job title and put the job title in quotes, and then have a capital AND and have a word like risk or finance or something like that. And you want to do this in an experimental way, so you're A/B testing. In a very short amount of time, you will find people you never knew existed. You will find companies that are perfect for your product or service that you may not even be aware of. If you're not familiar with Boolean search, there's a number of tutorials that you can get. You can search that on the LinkedIn itself. There are ways of doing it. I can tell you, if you can master those 4 terms, and or not and quotes, you will find that this thing becomes much, much easier. Stringing together keywords with the connector and, putting phrases in quotes. When you put a phrase in quotes, the search on LinkedIn will look for that entire string of words. But we want to be very good at it, because if we're able to search, we can find an enormous number of people. One of the biggest mistakes people make when they are prospecting is they spend far too much time doing the research. If you don't quickly discover people by using the LinkedIn search terms around Boolean search, there are a number of other ways to do it. And I've listed here other places in an organization where you may be able to make it a much quicker search. So for example, You call an IT help desk. You call the admin for one of the C-level officers, an admin for one of the executives, and simply ask the question, who in your company has responsibility for X? You will surprise yourself at how helpful people are when you do that. This isn't prospecting itself, it's the search for the people you want to prospect. So the combination of these two things, the idea of doing both the Boolean search on LinkedIn and using your phone as a research tool, will enormously accelerate the ability to identify those key people. Task number one is to create an efficient process for finding the people that are most likely to make the decisions you care about and not relying entirely on job title. If you look at the data around who is able to fill the funnel with the greatest number of qualified leads, one thing they do is they regard job title as maybe a third or fourth level term. Any of these things, so either using Boolean search on LinkedIn or having a call or an outreach to someone who can help you identify that person. Tyler, let me pause here for a moment. Do we have any questions at this point?
Not right now, Tom, but we encourage everyone to type some into the chat if you do.
No problem. Okay, finding the right people. You do the things I just talked about, you will find 4 to 6 times as many identified target individuals as you will by doing it by job title. If I didn't do anything else, if I said don't change anything else, just find more of the right people, can you imagine how many more opportunities you would identify? One of the things that constantly comes out in the research we do is that people, the thing that makes them most uncomfortable, particularly when we're using the phone, is we get that immediate rejection. People may hang up on us. People may obviously go quite distant. Let's face it, they're not sitting around waiting for a call like, oh boy, I can't wait for somebody who doesn't know me, is not on my calendar, and I don't recognize to get in contact with me. There is a way of creating curiosity, hear what I'm saying, which is almost irresistible unless the person that we've called on or sent an email to is actually on their way to a meeting, or is actually late for something, or is actually preoccupied with something important. We call it 3x3 research, and basically it employs a very interesting phenomenon, which this gentleman, Daniel Kahneman, won a Nobel Prize for employing. It's labeled System 1 versus System 2. It's the way the human mind works. Most of us, most of the day, research would say well over 90% of our waking time are operating in what neuroscience refers to as System 1. It's not an anatomical part of your brain, it's simply a way of thinking. And it's a completely binary system of judgment. Black, white, right, wrong, yes, no, on, off. And it allows the cerebral cortex, the analytic part of your mind, to relax. Now, when someone picks up a phone call they didn't recognize, they don't recognize your name, they don't recognize your voice, you're not on their calendar, what do you think System 1 is telling them? Their mind is racing towards, should I hang up? Oh my gosh, I wish I didn't pick up this phone. And they'll come up with a set of excuses. Oh, you caught me at a bad time. I'm not really interested, etc. They don't hear anything you're saying. System 2 is what happens when the analytic mind is engaged. And this is what we need to do if we're going to have any kind of exchange. It's how I'm going to get them to open the email, because I'm going to put something in the subject line. It's how I'm going to get them to talk to me when I call them unexpectedly. It's how I'm going to get them to read and respond to a social media message. It's how I'm going to get them to be curious about my voicemail. I usually describe the difference in this by giving you an example. If I were to stop 100 people at random on the street and I were to ask them a simple question. In the biblical story of the Great Flood, how many of each animal did Moses bring on the ark? 98 out of 100 will say 2. Moses didn't have an ark, Noah did. And the reason your mind thought 2, even though your ears heard Moses, is because your mind was operating in system 1. If I can get you in system 2, I now have the opportunity to actually have an exchange with you. If I can get you in system 2 with my email, you're actually going to open it. If I can get you in system 2 with my voicemail, you'll actually listen to the whole thing. So the trick is, what do we do to get somebody curious enough to actually open the mind for that few moments? Well, we do that by finding, and please listen to this carefully, we want to find 3 facts in under 3 minutes, 3 by 3, 3 facts in under 3 minutes about them professionally that they will be surprised you know. And the good news is that information is larded all over the place. LinkedIn's a great source. Google, the 10Q, the 10K, the news feed, anything that demonstrates that you have done a bit of research about them or their company. If, for example, you were to call me at random and you were to say something like, Tom, I was doing some research on LinkedIn today on you and your company, and I noted you've written several books. I'm instantly and almost irresistibly going to now listen to a bit more of the call. Why? Because no one calls me and says that. The fact of the matter is you actually had to learn something about me to do it. If you were to call and say, I noted that Funnel Clarity won a series of awards for being the best training company in the United States, I would listen, because that's not something people typically know. The good news is that you can find these things, and the reason we emphasize 3 minutes is because you don't want to write a biography of someone. You merely have to find something that they will be surprised you know. Let me tell you what some of the best ones are. I looked on LinkedIn and I saw that you and I are connected to X, a common individual. I saw on LinkedIn that you and I are in the same group. I saw that you went to William & Mary or the University of Wisconsin. Any of these things will put the person into system 2 irresistibly, unless they are legitimately preoccupied with something. Instead of just blowing you off, you now have them engaged. If it's your email, they're going to open it. If it's your voicemail, they're going to listen to it. If it's a social media message, they're going to read it. And if you're on the phone, you will hear their voice change. When we take voice prints of people using this technique, once they use it, and the person responds, the person responding has an entirely different voice print. It's the voice print of talking to a colleague. Their voice print then changes because the nervousness goes away. If you just try this, you will surprise yourself. What doesn't...
Tom, we have a question.
Yeah.
On 3 by 3 research.
Sure.
So, the pandemic is on everybody's mind right now.
Yep.
Do you think that bringing up the pandemic is good for 3 by 3 research, or should they just avoid that altogether?
I would avoid it altogether. The problem is that there is so much of a flood of information now about pandemic. It has now been going on for 9 months. We're all very well aware of the stresses and strains. It sort of makes this list. So asking somebody how's the weather, asking about or referring to their title, these things are guaranteed to keep them in system 1. I also want you to avoid the nervous habit of saying someone answers the phone and you go, hi, this is Tom Snyder. How are you doing today? That is an absolute guarantee they will stay in system 1. So no, I wouldn't mention the pandemic. I would simply use whatever facts I found about them or their company through this little bit of research. You can find that information all over the place. Surprisingly, most people have a lot of it in their own CRM. They have LinkedIn as a tremendous source, Google a tremendous source, news feeds about the company, news feeds in the announcements people make. Particularly if you note anything in their profile where they've attended a conference, like somebody who's attending this, or you've noticed that they published something as a blog, you saw their video, any of these things will get them now to engage. If you use that technique, you're going to find that you have about 6 to 7 times as many exchanges as you do by simply starting the intuitive way. This isn't because we say so, it's because the data say so. So please take a moment. Oh, by the way, I'll make one comment. It's a bit dangerous to do something that you find on Facebook. Facebook tends to be a very personal thing. I always make the joke, I could absolutely get you in system 2 if I were to call you unexpectedly and you don't know me, and I say something like, I know where your children go to school, but I'm not sure it's a good idea. I think you may find the police at your door if you do something like that. So I would suggest you use the sources that we've talked about here. All of that is now done prior to the execution of the outreach. I want to talk about how you lead in to a phone call. Email feels safer because you don't get the rejection as vividly as you might do on the phone. But as I emphasize, the data are absolutely irrefutable. The more you can rely on the phone and use social media, email, voicemail as an adjunct as opposed to the centerpiece, the more successful you will be. But of course, the question arises, what happens when they pick up the phone? We train thousands of people on these things, and what you find the first time people try, they actually get a hold of a person, and then they hang up. Whew, that was scary. I was all prepared to talk, and then they answered. Holy cow, I was preparing my voicemail. So there is a sequence that's important. The first thing you want to do is make sure you understand what name they like to be called. If I call up Richard and he goes by Rick, or if I call up Elizabeth and she goes by Liz, I'm automatically putting that person even in a stronger system 1 state of mind. How can I find that name? Well, there's a bunch of ways. 1, if you get their voicemail, they don't use their formal name unless it's the name they like to go by. You can also talk to somebody at the company. Does she go by Elizabeth, Beth, Liz? How does she like to be called? But the easiest way to do it is look on LinkedIn recommendations. Because when people write a recommendation, they don't write, no one writes a recommendation about myself as Thomas, they write it as Tom. So looking at the recommendations, you can quickly understand what name they like to be called by. And then it's a sequence. 2 of these are optional, 2 of them are essential. First of all, you're going to greet them. I would suggest that when you do that, you say something akin to, hi, Bob, this is Tom with Funnel Clarity. No one needs to know your last name. They won't remember it anyway until the call gets later on. They may even ask you later, what was your name again? And then you can say something, if you choose to, about acknowledging the interruption. I know I called you unexpectedly. I'll only be a moment. Do you have a second? If you use that technique, you will find that many people will say something like, yeah, I guess I have a minute, or I'm really pressed for something. That's why it's optional. You may or may not do it. It's a stylistic thing as to what makes you comfortable. You then may want to say, I understand you have responsibility for X. What is X? The decisions you care about, the area of business performance that you affect. And you want to make sure if you're going to do that again, you make it very short and very specific. But the 2 most important things, whether you do the options or not, is to be sure you use the name they like to be called. Be sure that you are briefly introducing yourself. And then if you don't do those two optional things, or either one of them, move immediately to the fact that's going to get them in system 2. Hi, Bob. This is Tom Snyder with Funnel Clarity. You know, I was doing some research today, and I've noticed on LinkedIn that you went to X, or you speak German, or you recently published a blog on Y. Something that will tell them you're not just someone trying to pitch. And you will be amazed at the response. Now, I don't want to mislead you here. It's not like people are going to go, oh yeah, that's great, thanks for calling. They may give you a kind of curious, hesitant reaction, like, yeah, that's right. That tone of voice is curiosity. You will hear it vividly, as opposed to the difference when you do it the old way. Also, you will find that people open email. So if we're going to use that fact and we're going to use email, put it in the subject line. I saw you published X blog. I noted you went to this university. We're both in this group on LinkedIn. Something like that. They're going to open that email. Remember, there's been an enormous increase in email volume, an enormous increase in voicemail volume. We have to be able to get that headwind to stop. And we do it by employing this idea of generating curiosity with this magical thing from 3x3.
Tom, there's another great stopping point. So another question came in. It says, can you just ask the prospect directly if they prefer one name over the other?
Yeah, you can. Let me say this. It's not impolite to do it. It is, however, dangerously close to keeping them in system 1, because what you're saying is, you don't know me, I don't know you. And my fear is it's a harder transition out of that into the 3x3. Personally, when I do this, I simply go with the name and I go right into the transition into this fact. They should be surprised I know. And you can use any of the ones I just talked about. It's particularly strong, by the way, if you can cite someone that you are both connected to in first level LinkedIn, something about where they went to school, something about a group they're in. Those things actually make a really big difference. If you're going to do the permission to continue, be sure to acknowledge that you've interrupted them, that you know they weren't expecting the call, and promise to be brief. And if you're going to confirm their responsibilities, make it a very quick question, because we want to get to that 3x3 moment when the mind will open up.
So fantastic. I think there's another comment on the names that maybe you could reflect on, Tom. This one's from Leon, who mentioned that he's offended if a stranger is trying to sell him something with using his first name and not putting like a Mr. or a Ms., Mrs. in front of it. How would you react to that, Tom?
Yeah, there's no data that indicates that, but the most important thing, Leon, is this: do what you're comfortable with. The more uncomfortable you make yourself, the more likely that nervous tone of voice is going to be off-putting. It's going to keep them in system 1. So I would suggest you try it both ways, but if you're uncomfortable not just going with first name, please, comfort is what we're going for here. Also remember that you're not calling to sell them anything. You're calling to share something. You're calling to hopefully generate enough credibility to get an appointment on the books. We don't want to have go into a sales pitch in this kind of call, because it's not going to work. We're going to put them immediately back in system 1 and they're going to blow us off. So
there's another question, and this one pertains to permission to continue. Mm-hmm. This person says, since permission to continue is optional, what is the true benefit of using this approach? And what are the drawbacks of not using it?
Oh, great question. Okay, couple of things. First of all, if we're going to use it, the benefits are that you are acknowledging that you interrupted their time and they don't expect your call, and you're promising to be brief. So they already know that you've made a promise not to do a lengthy sales call. The downside of doing it is that you're not able to acknowledge that right up front. Some people make that reference after the person has reacted to the 3x3. Remember, you have interrupted their day. They don't expect you to call, and they certainly don't welcome email in their inbox from people they don't know. We won't have time to go over this today, but do not hesitate to send in-mail. Do not hesitate to send a text message to someone's cell phone. I know that seems alien to many people. It isn't. The idea is, though, we need to use this technique that we call 3x3 to break through to system 2. Try it. Believe me. If you fail, they're never going to remember who you are anyway. That nobody what's the name of the last person that called you randomly? You don't remember. No one remembers, because in system 1 there's no reason to remember. So I think it's something that is a stylistic thing. There are no data that indicate one is preferable to another, but there is a huge amount of comfort that can be generated if you take that approach.
So one more just came in, and this is from another Tom on the call. He's asking, could you please explain what the purpose of a prospecting call is if it's not to make the sale? And if not, when does the sales call happen?
Yeah, again, boy, these are great questions. I'm really impressed. First of all, let's get our terms right and make sure we're speaking the same language. You can call prospecting a part of sales. When I'm referring to the difference between a prospecting call and a sales call, I'm referring to what is the outcome you're going for. When you're reaching out to somebody, whether through any medium, voicemail, email, whatever, the whole purpose of that outreach is to get a first meeting scheduled in the calendar. That first meeting is really what I would term the beginning of a sales effort. And I separate it from prospecting for the sake of distinction. And that separation is, we have to establish ourselves as credible, and we have to have enough curiosity generation that the person is interested in continuing. I'll tell you what can happen when we train people on this, and when we get to the credibility piece. And if you're interested in this, please give us a call, because we don't have time to do it today. But when you get to the credibility piece, you'll often find, many times, the person will say, well, hey, Bob, I've got about 10 more minutes. Tell me what you got. Don't take the bait. You want to say, I know I surprised you with the call, and I promise to be respectful of your time. Let's get out the calendar and find a time when we can grab 30 minutes that's convenient for you. I'll be fully prepared to create value in that call, and let's do that. The whole purpose of prospecting is to get the first appointment on the calendar, whether we're doing email, voicemail, whatever. It is not to go into a sales pitch. And that's an important thing to remember, even if the invitation comes to us to do a sales pitch. We really want to resist that temptation, because maintaining curiosity is the first and most important part of filling a funnel, establishing and maintaining curiosity. Then when we get on that first call, we're going to do discovery. We're going to find out what they're struggling with. We're going to find out what they want to fix, accomplish, or avoid that we may be able to provide. We certainly don't want to try to make a sales pitch at that point. Okay, so one thing that I want you to be thinking about is not trying to do all these things at once. I want you to be thinking about, what are we going to do to sort of move our skill sets up. One thing we need to do is decide what are those key words that will really help us when we do the search for the right people. And let's get comfortable with Boolean Algebra first. The Boolean search terms, whether that's on Google, whether that's on LinkedIn, or any other database. The second thing we want to do is be sure that we have identified 3 facts we can use to get their attention. We only need one most of the time, but we'd like to have some fallbacks in case the first one doesn't work. And then practice that lead in. If we're going to be using the phone, practice that lead in. If we send an email and we put the 3x3 fact in the subject line and they open that email, and that email is only 3 sentences, and we're talking about the things their peers have discovered, what have people in their role been struggling with? And we can demonstrate that we know that. It's very likely they're going to respond to it. At some point, we're going to be talking to these people. Be sure that we're prepared when we talk to them to be nailing down that first scheduled appointment, and we're setting the expectations that we're going to be doing some discovery. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about is something we call overtime questions. Once the appointment has been set, let's take the example, we've called someone unexpectedly, we've had a very brief conversation, maybe 3 or 4 minutes long. We've generated enough curiosity that they're willing to put an appointment on the calendar. After the appointment is confirmed, one thing that can be extremely valuable to ensure that they actually keep that appointment is what we call overtime questions. Ask a set of questions that will better prepare you for the first call. Questions like, would anyone else be interested in this topic? Perhaps you have a colleague or two that might want to join us. Be thinking ahead of time about the 3 or 4 questions you can ask in the last few moments of that call after the appointment has been scheduled that will give you a starting point for when that first scheduled call begins. If you try to do it spontaneously, you won't. You need to be thinking, if I got an appointment and it was only a brief conversation, what 3 or 4 pieces of information would I most want to have? What would I like to leave them with thinking about so that the expectation of having that appointment is fulfilled? And I think if you could think of these terms, I think you'll be surprised about how effective it can be. Tyler, anything come through the chat?
Not in particular. Oh, here we go. Someone just came in from Constantine. How much talking versus listening should be happening on that first call?
Yeah, we've all learned that successful sales calls is where the prospect or the client is doing more talking than the salesperson. And we've all been told we need to ask questions and whatnot in a sales call. In an effective prospecting call, you will find that the ideal is slightly more time will be talking by the prospector as opposed to the prospect. What you're trying to do is move through a sequence where you get them into system 2, you then transition into something you know about their peer group, and we call that a shared truth. We can, if you're interested, we'd be happy to talk to you about that. But something that you know their peer group is struggling with. Other people in their role have told you that. Or we have noted recently that those who have your responsibilities are really focused on X. We haven't even mentioned what we sell yet. We need them to know that we know something about being in the family. We know about what, think of it this way. Think of it as, what would you overhear in the conversations at a conference between peer-to-peer conversations as to what is currently a struggle, what has their attention, what is the kind of thing they're looking to fix, accomplish, or avoid. Then pause and let them react. One of the biggest mistakes that can be made is that we learn these things and then we rush through them. When we get to something that will ideally get them into system 2, we have to pause and listen. Are they in system 2? We can't just assume they are, we pause. If you listen to people prospecting who haven't learned how to do it right, they talk really fast, they talk in a different tone of voice because they just hope they can get enough information out there before they get hung up on. If you watch how people write out emails when they're reaching out to a prospect, they often give a long exegesis about all the wonderful things their solutions offer. I don't care yet. I need you to give me a reason to think you know something I want to know. And it's not about your company or your product or your service. So with regard to prospecting calls, the balance between our talking and their talking, it's going to skew slightly towards the prospector, but be sure you've paused and let them react. We have lots of times when people will offer up something from the 3x3 research, a fact or whatever, and people actually do respond with a certain amount of welcome. Yes, I did write that blog. Did you enjoy it? Or what'd you pick out of it or something like that? But you really need to listen and take a deep breath. It will be natural because you're going to hear a kind of receptivity that you're not used to. It doesn't often go like that when people are prospecting in the intuitive way. I'll say this, if your prospecting efforts in your company are done entirely by email, you are functioning in a very suboptimal way. If people are not employing social media, they're not using the phone, you automatically are reducing by several 100% the likelihood of actually having an interchange with people. So don't get too hung up in the prospecting effort about they have to talk more than we do. That's a general conclusion of what the research shows in sales, but even in sales, there are calls where they need to talk a lot more. There are calls where you have to talk a lot more.